morning, students. In this video, I shall discuss the life cycle of the angiospermic plant. Normally, we have already discussed the different aspects of the sexual reproduction in flowering plant. But after the completion of this chapter, this is the last part where how the whole angiospermic plant, it completes its life cycle from where it starts and where it completes. There are different types of life cycles we observe in the different groups of the plants. For example, the Hypnotic life cycle, which is normally occur in the lower plants like your algae, the gametophyte. Normally, in case of Chlamydomonas, the gametophyte, they are normally haploid type or N type. So that is why this the Hypnotic life cycle is observed there. Then the haplodiploidic life cycle in case of pteridophytes like fawn. In case of pteridophytes, normally this type of haplodiploidic life cycle is observed. And but in some higher plants like your angiospermic plant, this is called the diplohaploidic type of life cycle. And what happens in this life cycle? Normally here the most important thing is alternation of generation. Alternation of generations occur. So what do you mean by alternation of generation? As we have already studied in your class 11, the two type of generation like your sporophytic generation and the gametophytic generation. In the sporophytic generation, normally the main plant is observed in case of angiospermic plant. But the gametophytes, where the male gamete, the microspore, the pollen grain is formed here, the female gamete, the megaspore or the egg cell, and these two gametes, they fuse together to form the zygote. So this phase, it is called the gametophytic phase. And always the gametophytic phase and sporophytic phase, they alternate with one another. That means after completion of the gametophyte, it forms the zygote. From the zygote, then the sporophytic plant develops. So that is why this is called the alternation of generation. Gametophyte to sporophyte, sporophyte to gametophyte. The sporophyte will never form the sporophyte again. So that is why in case of asexual reproduction, it may be observed because it is developed from the either leaf or from the root or from the stem. But in case of sexual reproduction, normally the alternation of generations is observed in the angiospermic plant. So here the life cycle which is observed, that is called the diplohaploidic life cycle, or sometimes it is also called the diploidic life cycle because the diploid part or the sporophytic phase, which is the diploid one, this is the diploid phase, and this diploid phase or the sporophytic phase, it is the dominant phase. This is the dominant phase of the life cycle, and mostly the plant or the main plant of the angiospermic plant, that is called your sporophytic plant, and it is diploid in nature. But in the part of their life cycle, normally the gametophytic phase is observed, but this gametophyte phase, it is dependent on the sporophytic phase. This dependent on sporophytic phase because this gametophytic phase or the gametophytic phase, it is normally dependent on the sporophytic phase because the main plant, it is the sporophyte plant. Now, how this life cycle is completed here? Look at this phase. Suppose this is the seed. Suppose we consider it is the first phase. From the seed, the germination of the seedling occurs. That is the plumule will develop into the shoot part of the plant. Then the radicles, they develop the root part of the plant. And after that, it grow in size. Then the stem, branches, leaf. Then most important part of the reproduction, that is the flower. And this flower is bloomed there. After that, this flower normally contains the two important parts. The male part of the flower, that is called the stamen, and the female part, that is the pistil or the unit is the carpel. And the stamen normally it contains the anther, and this anther, normally it is within the microsporangium or pollen sac, and inside the microsporangium, the microspore mother cell which undergo the process of meiosis, and it forms the pollen grain, and this pollen grain now later on develop into the male gamete, and this pollen grain are the which develop in the male gamete, then it fuses with the female gamete or the egg cell to form the zygote. Now this is the carpel. Inside the carpel the ovule is there. Inside the ovule the embryo sac is there, and inside the embryo sac the egg cell is there. And this egg cell, it is also called the megaspore. And this megaspore develops from the megaspore mother cell. And this megaspore mother cell undergo the process of meiosis, and now the megaspore or the egg cell, it is haploid in nature. Here the pollen, it is haploid in nature, and the egg cell, it is also haploid in nature, and this gametophytic phase, it starts from this pollen, and here it starts from the megaspore or the egg cell. So the microspore and the megaspore starts here. So that is why in this particular part the gametophyte starts, and after that these two gametes, they fuse together to form the zygote, and when they form the zygote it becomes diploid. So that is why here normally double fertilization occurs. It is the first fertilization, or it is called a syngamy, and during this syngamy this diploid zygote is formed. But now the diploid polar nucleus, it fuses with the second pollen or second male gamete to form a triploid cell, and this triploid cell, which is also called the endosperm or primary endosperm nucleus, and this primary endosperm nucleus develop into the primary endosperm cell, and this primary endosperm cell, or it is called the central cell, and this central cell, it develops the endosperm. So that is why this is the endosperm, and this process which occurs simultaneously along with the formation of the zygote or syngamy. So syngamy and the triple fusion, this process is called the triple fusion. The syngamy and the triple fusion which occurs simultaneously. So that is why the process of fertilization which occurs in the angiospermic plant, that is called the double fertilization. So this double fertilization, it is named so because the fertilization occurs twice. The first pollen fuses with the egg cell to form the zygote, that is called the syngamy, which actually develops into the embryo. This is the embryo, this is the developing embryo. So that is why this embryo actually develops from the zygote. So that is why from this embryo the seedling and the new plant develops. But for the developing embryo, the triploid cells, normally the primary endosperm cells, they provide the nutrients or the nutrition to the developing embryo. So that is why this endosperm is very much important here, because without the endosperm the seedlings or the embryo cannot get the nutrient. So that is why both are going on simultaneously, and endosperm precedes the formation of the zygote or the development of the embryo, because it ensures the supply of nutrients for the developing embryo. So after that, when the zygote is formed, now it is become diploid in nature. So when it becomes diploid, now it will develop into the embryo. It is called the proembryo. Then the mature embryo. This is the proembryo, and this is the mature embryo. After that, the mature embryo, it will remain embedded inside the seed. Now seed contains the cotyledon, seed contains the embryo, seed contains the seed coat, seed contains the pore or seed pore. So these are the different parts of the seed, and seed undergo the process of dormancy or remain in the dormant condition for certain period. during the unfavorable environmental condition for the maturation of the embryo. Sometimes some seeds they need certain time. So when the conditions become favorable or when the suitable conditions are available, at that time the germination of the seedling occurs. And this process, it is called germination. After the process of germination, then the growth of the plant occurs, and the first phase, the juvenile phase, or that is the growth phase. After the maturation, after the growth or completion of the growth, then that is called the maturation phase. And during this maturation, the flowering occurs, and certain hormones which are normally responsible for the formation or the blooming of the flower in this plant. So that is why after the formation of the flower, then the anther and the carpels or the pistils, they are formed, the male and the female part, and they form the pollen grain and or microspore or the megaspore by the process of microsporogenesis and the megasporogenesis. So in this way, the sporophytic phase, although it is dominant one, and the gametophytic phase, it is very much reduced. It is the part of their life cycle. Normally, this plant sometimes 100 years old plant, but every year this type of gametophytic phase occurs during flowering and fruiting. But the main plant remains the same. So that is why this is a complex life cycle which is observed in the angiospermic plant, and by this process, normally the life cycle of the plant is going on year after year. So that is why this dominant phase, it is the sporophytic phase, and the recessive phase, or that is the dependent phase, you can say, it is the gametophytic phase. But both the phases are alternate with one another, but here it is dominant phase and it is the dependent phase which going on in the same plant year after year. Now I hope this video will be useful for you, and if it is really useful for you, then please like it and subscribe for further videos.